Hey guys, Chris Dick here. We're going to be moving into part 7 of our social media integration application. And what I thought I would work on today is a Facebook client, or let's call it a generalized social media client. And by client, what that means is we're going to move out some of this code that we've put into our Facebook controller. We're going to move that into something a little bit more generic so that we can extend and grab, integrate with other social media applications. So let's take a look at what this posts action actually does. So the first thing that we ask for is get the access token. I have to learn how to spell access token there. Okay, get the access token. Once we have the access token, we format a URL to retrieve posts. I'm just going to spell that right. Posts or feed data from Facebook. Okay. Now, what you're going to find is that most of the social media applications out there use a very similar method to get the information. Once I have a URL and an access token, that's pretty much all I need to run a web request. So here I generate a web request, okay, using the URL. All right, the next stage is I ask for data from the server. Spell that right there. All right, and from here, I place result into a string. All right, and then this last part here is I convert result to JSON object. Okay. Now, um, that being said, those are the important things, the things that I've just commented. Those are the important things that we can find as common elements in any kind of social media application. Um, so, with that being said, what I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to start off by creating a base class, and this class is going to be called, let's call it social media client. Okay, this social media client is going to hold a few things. Namely, we are going to have the access token. Okay, the access token. I think I'm going to also store some information about the provider. So we'll call that the provider key. So in this case, the provider is Facebook that we're going to be using. And this is a social media client, and what it is it's going to be used as a base class. So on top of that, we're going to create a Facebook client that derives some information from our social media client. Next thing we need is a public function that will return our access token when asked for it. So we need to do a couple things here. If we go to, we're going to call this get access token. Okay. And in order to have our access token, we first off need the user ID. Okay. Now the user ID comes from our, over here, we'll bring this up. This is our identity.userid call, okay? And you'll notice that we have this other part of this called our user manager. So we're going to have to do a couple things to do this. Now, in our Facebook controller, we have this code right here. We're going to cut that away, okay? We're going to take that away, and we're going to place it into our social media controller. Okay, now you're going to notice that we're going to get some errors here, and that is there's two reasons that we're going to get this. First off, we need to have some of these pieces, so we're going to cut those out. We're going to ask for the using statements up here. All right. Next one, we're going to pull in, let's pull in system IO. And why not? Let's do some threading in here. We'll make sure our context is threaded. Okay. Now we're going to still have this error here, and the reason is HTTP context is not defined in our client. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to add in a property for HTTP base, and it was going to be called the HTTP client. Okay, this HTTP client or context, sorry, is going to be used. Is going to be derived from our controller that we're using. So when I ask for the information about the access token, I'm going to be feeding in the HTTP context from the controller at the same time, and you'll see how this all ties together at the end. Now we're going to take our information here. We're going to take this this detail out. I'm going to copy it, paste it in. Okay. Now the next thing that we're going to be doing here, you'll notice these red underlines here, and that is because I have to create an asynchronous task. All right. Asynchronous sometimes will work a little faster for us, so we're going to try to maintain that. And then the last thing we are going to be returning is our access token that we retrieve from the claims. Okay. Now you'll notice these other red underlines here, and that is because before we were returning an action result, and HTTP status code result is that kind of action result. So we are now only returning a claim result. So we don't need to have that in there. We can just take that away. Okay. Now the next thing that we're going to do here is going to add in a parameter called provider. Provider. Actually, you know what? I'm going to do this very simply, and I'm going to simply do this. Okay, we're going to make some changes here. Where it said Facebook, we're going to change it to say string.format. Change that to a 0 parameter there. Okay, and we're just going to feed in our provider key that we had up top. Okay, if you recall, it's right here. Okay, so that way it's always going to be looking for URN : tokens : and then whatever the provider key actually is. Okay, if we have if we return a token that matches what we're asking for over here, then we can return that token. Otherwise, we just want to we want to just return null. Okay. Now that being said, if we return an access token, then in this function, I'm going to have it do two things. I'm going to have it give me the access token dot value, and I'm going to set our access token. Remember, that's just a string that has nothing to do with the claim that is received. It's just the value of the claim that is received. Okay. And you know what? Just for consistency's sake, I'm going to fix this spelling error right there. There we go. Apply. Nice. Better. All right. So that being said, now we've got this part here that is going to be a bit of a problem for us. So I'm going to be just supplying the user ID that comes in from the get access token. Okay. Now, there's a couple things that we want to do, because we do want to have it so that we don't have to always ask for the user ID all the time. We're going to have two different functions. One that just says, you know, take the current user, or another function that perhaps we can feed in a username from somewhere else. So let's do this. So from here, we are going to do this here. Now, what we want to do is we want to, in order to get that user information here, if you recall, that's the code that actually gets our user ID. So we have to check for a couple things. First of all, we have to check for, do we have a valid HTTP context? So if it equals null, then, hey, you know what? We're going to return null. Simple. Okay. Next one. We're going to ask for the user name. Okay. So user ID equals like that. Oops. And you'll notice it's saying that there's a problem here, and that's because we are asking for that right there. Okay, so we were passing in the other parameter, so we'll take that away. Okay, and now all we have to do is call await get access token, and then we feed in our user ID. Okay, so now we have this nice, very quick statement here that rather than feeding in the user ID every time, we can just call get access token, and it'll just call the default user. There's some advantages to doing that, and it's just basically less coding, less things to worry about within the controller. Okay, now that we have this, we do not need that information anymore in our Facebook controller. Okay. The next thing we're going to deal with, and we're going to deal with our Facebook in a moment, but we're going to deal with our web request. So we have some information here that we can also copy out. Okay. And I'm copying that, and I am going to create yet another function here. Call it, it's going to be an asynchronous task of dynamic. Okay, now the dynamic, what it's going to do is it's going to return the JSON object that we get from our JSON decode. So, and you'll notice we have some issues here that we'll deal with right now. Just do that using system.net. Okay, and our URL, we're going to place that up in here, URL. Okay, because what we're going to do is we're going to feed in a URL that will allow us to get information that way. Okay, now at this point you'll see here we have some other things that do not need to be in here because we're not, first of all, we are not just retrieving posts, we're actually retrieving a JSON object that comes directly from the feed. So, and then later on in our Facebook client, we'll actually format it as posts. So we're not going to have this information. We don't have a view bag. We don't need to do that anymore. And we are not returning a view. We are actually just simply returning our JSON object. Okay, so there we have that information. If you recall, we still have all of our comments that we pulled in before. Okay, so our get element, our get function is slightly different, but what it does is it just simply allows us to compact some of our code that will end up in our Facebook controller. As always, that's just what we were talking about earlier. Okay, all right, now we're going to go ahead now and create a Facebook client. Okay, and this we do by very simply doing this. Facebook client, we put it into our Facebook folder. Okay, you'll notice it's going in there. So Facebook client. It is going to inherit social media client. All right. And with that, we are going to create a base constructor. And from here, we can set some default values. Okay. Set our provider to Facebook. Okay. Now, one thing that we need in our social media client, I'm going to add in one more parameter here, and we'll just keep adding parameters as we go. But essentially, these are parameters that are that every social media application will use. I'm going to call this the base URL. Okay. Now, in Facebook, that base URL is HTTP. Whoops. HTTP s://graph.facebook.com. Okay, and if we recall from down here in our Facebook controller, okay, I could easily just copy that out, and I'll do that just because. We'll go back over to our Facebook client, and there we have it. So we have our base URL set, we have our provider key set, all right. And that's the information that we need from there. Now, that means that when we call our Facebook client, when we create it, we do an instantiation of that, it will automatically set all these defaults so that we don't lose any information. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to set a property that holds our feed URL. Okay, and we can do that right here. Okay, our feed URL, we're going to pull in part of our data from our Facebook controller. And I'm going to pull in all this information over here, all that stuff that we grabbed up to the access token. Okay, we're not going to pull the access token in yet. We will in a moment though. Okay, our Facebook feed. Now you remember here we used these curly braces, and we had to double them up so that they would be escaped. We're going to take away those doublings. If you feel more comfortable, just go into your Facebook Graph Explorer and pull up your query from before, and really simply pull that information in and just cut and paste it. It's the easiest way to do it, really. Okay. Now, you'll notice here that this feed URL is only available in the Facebook client. It's not available in the social media client, and that is because the terminology used in Facebook may be different from somewhere else. So I'm going to be separating these two. All right, the next thing that we're going to add here is a function. Okay, and yet again, it's an async function. You'll see it'll start complaining about threading, and that's because we haven't added threading to this. We are going to add, this is going to return our posts from Facebook. Okay. Now this one here is specific to Facebook. Okay. You'll notice in our social media client we have a generic get. Okay. So we go out, we say, hey, give me the response from this, and whatever that URL returns is what our end result over here will format. Okay. Now over in our, oops, you know what? Let's just deal with this one first here. We just hover over there, add using.threading.tasks. Okay, you'll notice it's up there now. All right. The return will be an object of type of posts. Okay. So if you recall, down over here, we have that little statement that takes the JSON objects and puts it into C# object right there. So we very simply do this. Okay. Now, the next stage we will do. Okay, we've got a few things that we have to do. Remember, what we have to ask for is the access token. Okay. We have to get data. All right. And then over here, we convert JSON. Okay. So our access token, what we're going to do is we are very simply going to call our get access token, and we're going to use a parameterless function here, because right now I'm keeping this very, very simple here. We have to, you'll see that once we get to the point of getting that information, you'll see that we pull the information about the user from the HTTP context. Okay, so our dynamic JSON object equals get, okay, and our feed URL, we have to pull that data in now, okay. So here we are going to do a couple things. All right, so now we have string.format. We have 3 parameters that we're going to pull in now. Okay, so we have, this one will be our base URL. This part will be our feed URL. And this part will be our access token. Okay, so now the next step here, we add in base URL. Okay, now we add in feed URL. And then we add in the access token. Okay, now over here we have part of our query string that we have to add in. Okay, and if you recall, the access token query key looks like this. Oops, that says strung. I'm supposed to say string. Now, if everything has gone right, you know, if I call this, I should have an access token. That means this access token will feed into our URL. If we have a valid URL, then we can run the get, which will give us a JSON object return. If we have JSON object return, it means we can also return our posts. Okay. Now I haven't got any error checking in here yet. We'll add that later on once we have debugged and made sure everything works. So I'm going to put some debug points here as well. Now our Facebook controller, obviously we've got a lot of things that we have to comment out here. So I'm going to comment, and I'm just commenting because if something goes wrong, I still want to be able to test and make sure that it actually worked. So now the next thing here, we're still returning a view, all right? And we are going to create a models.socialmedia.facebook.client, okay? And Facebook client is our name, equals new Facebook client, okay? Now we have to set some variables. If you recall, we have one thing that we need to set, and that is the HTTP context. That HTTP context comes from our controller. And once we have that information in our Facebook client, we can get going here. So now it's going to ask for all of the default information that our posts need. Okay, and just again, just for the sake of having things as visible as possible here, I'm going to do this. So we do Facebook client dot posts. Okay. Now it's giving me an error here. What is the error? It's asking for a wait. That's simple. Fix that problem easily. And we're going to pass in posts into our view just as we did down here. You'll see it's right down at the bottom. Okay. So our lines of code are getting smaller and smaller all the time. I can probably take this down to a couple more lines of code, but let's test to see that it actually works here. Okay, let's get going. Okay, we're logged in. Now the next step, we'll simply go into our Facebook posts. Okay, and looks like we've kind of got all the stuff that we need, but I'm going to just hover over this Facebook client here and double check that all the information that I need is officially there. We have our user manager, Facebook provider key, field URL. We do not have an access token yet because we haven't asked for it. Now the way we've set things up as well is that I could ask for the access token prior to calling posts. It does call it in posts, but you don't. You could set it up so that you could call it separately. I'm trying to do things in a little bit more concise fashion. So we'll go into that. We'll debug, ask for our access token. If we have it, which we do, we're pretty good. Let's check out what our base URL is here. Our feed so far looks good. We will continue into what the URL looks like, and I'm going to show that in the magnifying glass so we can see the whole thing. We'll just double check that everything looks pretty right. Yeah, it looks pretty good from here. Now the next step, I'm going to put a debug point right there. Just make sure we actually have some data. Okay. We have, looks like we've got an issue, and we want to make sure what that issue is. Waiting for activation, it says. So there is a bit of a problem, and we'll start to deal with what the problem actually is. Okay, I see where the problem is. It's right here, and it's called, I'm calling an asynchronous message without putting the await, and it was giving me a problem, just telling me, just skipping over the command. So I'm going to now add in this await command. We'll restart it and get moving forward. Okay, so here's our feed wall again. We're looking pretty good, and I think we can stop that. Excellent. Okay, so let's take off our debug points here. One thing we know now is that our old code, totally unnecessary. We can move forward and continuing with our generic social media client development. So that's our first step in making more extensible use of the Facebook feeds. The next stage is we're going to start taking that data and putting it into our database and using it for some analysis purposes. So guys, remember to like and share. I really appreciate your time today, and looking forward to hearing from you in part 8. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.